Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Del Caro, and this is Politics in Perspective. Excited about this week's show. Of course, Trump got his one big, beautiful bill, sort of. We'll talk about that. In segment two, my good friend Chuck Devore will come in and talk about Trump's Golden Dome, and also because he was formerly in the California legislature, now he's in Texas. He and I love to chat about Texas versus California. We'll handle that. And in our third segment, we'll do a political roundup. I want to thank, of course, Patriot.tv for carrying the show and AUN TV as well. And of course, you can find us on YouTube, Rumble, and of course at politicalvanguard.com. You can find all the shows there on the podcast page. So please take a look at that and share that if you would. So let's get right into our first segment, which relates to Trump's one big bill. As you know, the United States government has this process. You could either have a House bill and a Senate bill, and have the president sign it after reconciliation. The problem with that, of course, is the Democrats aren't going to vote for anything that the Republicans put up, or almost anything. So, because the Senate Democrats would filibuster, the only way for Trump to get his tax bill through is through the reconciliation process. Well, what's that? Well, that's a process which allows for a bill like this size to go through, assuming that there is no significant change in revenues and in spending, taxes and collected and spending. So that's what the Republicans are doing. You might well know that it's been a hell of a long time between the last time there was actually a true budget process and the way we're doing things now, but this is the way it is. But importantly, the House Republicans have finally got a bill that they approved to send on to the Senate. And this could be where some of the fun starts. Now, what is this? It's almost June. So why did the Republicans take 5 months to get this done? That's kind of a problem in my view. If you recall, when Joe Biden got elected, the Democrats had 11 bills in the first 100 days. They were ready to go. They have ultimate discipline. Their members down the line don't nitpick at every single issue that's potentially in a bill. And therefore, they get these things done faster. They're very much a more disciplined party, not necessarily in a good way, right? But, it's good to ask questions. Their discipline also always includes a massive amount of spending. So that's the way they operate. The Republicans, not so much. So it has taken 5 months because they've had to go through all these procedural hurdles, all these negotiations. That's still too long in my view. It seems kind of ridiculous to me. What if this was a national emergency? Would they have really taken 5 months? Now, some would say it is an emergency. We need to cut spending. Others would say that you could be more deliberative. But still, it's been 5 months or almost 5 months, and it seems to me that's a really long time. And it's not finished. Getting a House bill is only a short part of the story. It's sort of 1/3. Then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate has to pass a bill. And then the two bills, unless they're the exact same language, and we'll talk a minute about why that's not going to be the case, then they have to reconcile those bills. They go through a process where House representatives meet with Senate representatives, and they reconcile the differences in their language, come up with one bill, then both vote on it, and then it would go to the president. So what's the likelihood that the Senate is going to agree to the Republican bill? Well, the answer, my friends, is they're not. They've already agreed. The Senate Republicans have already come out and talked about this issue. And that includes Senator Ted Cruz, who said he's not in favor of the House bill. If we go to this Washington Examiner story, this is their language. The Senate Republicans are vowing a major, not a slight, not a little, a major rewrite of President Donald Trump's one big, beautiful bill, despite House leadership's request to please not undo the bill. So, and then as I mentioned, Ted Cruz said outright when asked if he supported the bill, he said, no, of course not. No, quote, of course not. So where are we? What's wrong with the Senate, or why does the Senate have this particular point of view? Well, there are those in the Senate who are rightly complaining that the Republicans are spending as much as they spent under Joe Biden, and that the trouble here is the $2 trillion deficit. Senator Johnson from Wisconsin is big in that particular regard. He's not in favor of this bill. I think the same can be said of Ted Cruz. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to sit down, and I presume they're going to find other savings. Now, the Republicans claim that they cut over this long period of time $1.5 trillion of automatic spending. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Republicans in the House say they reduced the spending that otherwise would have occurred if they did nothing else, if the laws just remained the same. And that's not enough for Ron Johnson. And it's probably not enough for Ted Cruz and the others. And then there's this whole issue of SALT, which is the amount that you can deduct as a mortgage payment. The states of California and New York want that very high because the houses there are very expensive and they have these big mortgages and a lot of interest. I think in this Republican bill, it's at $40,000. It was much lower than that. So they got to fight over that, and they're going to fight over total spending. And then maybe, just maybe, they say before July 4th. I don't think so anymore. I mean, I heard it was going to be in April. Last I checked, it's no longer April. So it could just go on and on a bit. Here's the problem with it. The longer they do this, of course, the longer the chance that they don't do it at all. What if they don't do it at all? Well, then the Republicans will lose the midterms. Democrats will win the House. Democrats will start impeachment proceedings and hearings. That's what's on the other side of this. And by the way, the taxes. This bill has a continuation of the existing tax levels that were passed in 2017 that did so well for the economy. And it also has no new tax on tips, no taxes on Social Security as well, and no taxes on overtime. So do the Republicans get this? Do they know they're courting a big loss next year? And are these Republican holdouts that are in these moderate seats, so to speak, are they realizing this? Because if they don't pass it, they lose, period. So why are they fighting so hard against a bill that if they don't pass, they're going to lose? Well, they think they're going to lose if the bill passes. So they must think they're going to lose either way. Here's the reality. If the bill passes, the economy does well. That's their best chance, of course, for winning. So that's what's ahead for the Republicans. That's what's on the table. Losing in the midterms and Trump impeachment proceedings, because that's where the Democrats are. We'll talk more about where the Democrats are in segment number 3, but now I want to talk to you about this whole issue of taxes. I have a new Substack out, and you had literally the Director of Office of Management and Budget, OMB, say out loud on a Fox program that the tax bill is going to cost $4 billion or $400 billion. Sorry. The tax bill is going to cost. Now, this is a Republican saying this, and this kind of stuff just pisses me off to no tomorrow. So what does it mean when he says the tax bill is going to cost? Who's it going to cost? In his mind, he's saying out loud to you that's going to cost government money. How pernicious is that? And you should never repeat that. And no Republican should repeat that. No person who believes in freedom should believe that it costs government. It's your money. If you get taxed less, it costs you less. It doesn't cost the government anything. The person taking the money, it doesn't cost less for them to take less. I mean, what is in the minds of people when they say that? That it's the government's money. There's a word for that. It's called communism. That what you own belongs to the state, and if they let you have some of it back, it costs them less. So why do Republicans, all these years later after Reagan, all the years later after Art Laffer, Steve Moore, Larry Kudlow, and Forbes have been teaching Republicans that lower tax rates result in greater business activity and more receipts? Why are there still Republicans in very important positions, no less? Because Speaker Mike Johnson talked about the tax bill costing, how much it will cost. Why do they say this? Why is it that they don't understand that it's your money? And if you pay less, it's not costing the government, it's you playing keep away from the government because they don't deserve your money. And oh, by the way, if they keep taking it at these large amounts, what do you get? You get a recession. So here we are, May 2025. Almost 50 years, 40 some years since the Reagan tax cuts went in, produced greater revenue. That new rubric of deregulation and lower tax rates produced a vibrant economy for decades. That was only screwed up by George Bush and Clinton raising taxes. Talk about that later. But the reality is, what happened then is that we learned for a time that lower tax rates produce greater revenue. And we also came to understand that it's our money. 40 years later, they can't seem to remember that. And so please, when you hear anyone say tax cuts cost, they don't cost government. They cost you. And that's just a simple idea that we need to remember. This is America. It's our money. This isn't the Soviet Union or Russia, where the government thinks everything you own, they have a right to take. That's my thoughts in this opening segment. Joining me next will be Chuck Devore to talk about Trump's Golden Dome and Texas versus California. Thanks for watching Politics in Perspective. Welcome back, everybody, to Politics in Perspective. In this segment, we're going to talk with my good friend Chuck Devore, who now resides in Texas. We both are California refugees. He's a little bit better of a refugee. He went to a sane state. There he is. Chuck, how are you? You can see his bio. But one thing that he's got 2 books, which you should definitely take a look at. But I want to point out a couple things. I met you when you were in the State Assembly, of course. But the Reagan era Pentagon, where you were a special assistant for foreign affairs, how cool is that? And now you're in Texas. But I also want to thank you for your service to the country. Why don't you tell people what I'm referring to there with regard to the reserve?
Well, sure. Shortly after Reagan became president, there was kind of a wave of patriotism among many of us youth. And I, along with a lot of other people, enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1983. My hope at the time was to earn a scholarship. I was going to Cal State Fullerton at the time, paying my way through college. But I heard about this great school called Claremont McKenna College, but it was way out of my reach from a financial standpoint. So I joined the Army, competed for the scholarship, and earned a full ride to go to Claremont for a couple of years. That's where I graduated. I ended up serving 24 years in the California Army National Guard and in the Reserve, and retired as a lieutenant colonel, intelligence officer. And I'm still have my commission, Tom. So if Mars attacks and the president is desperate for old fat colonels, I could be called up.
There you go. That's awesome. I remember back in the days where you would have to go and you went out and you would talk about it, and I was always impressed on that. The one thing other than being California refugees that you and I share, of course, is that we both ran for the United States Senate in California. And I'm here to tell you, I still have one of your big posters, remember, with your, I think your arms are folded, right? And we the people behind it.
Yeah,
What year did you run?
that was 2010. I started running about 10 days after we lost the 2008 presidential election to Barack Obama, figuring that there'd probably be a backlash against Obama, given how left wing he was in 2010, and that probably the prospects for Republicans would be a little bit better than people figured that early. So I started running because I'm not a millionaire or a celebrity, so I had to make up for that with a lot of sweat equity into that campaign.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved supporting you back then, full disclosure. I've been a fan of Chuck for a long time for a couple of reasons, folks. One, many politicians are filled with ambition, and that's the best thing they have going for them, or at least the most prominent. But Chuck is, and I over the years have had great discussions on policy. He's got that down. He's very thoughtful. And the other part that's great about Chuck Devore is that he can actually talk to real human beings without a consultant telling him what to say. And I know, Chuck, you've met a billion politicians in your lifetime. I think you know what I'm talking about. They come in there and they give their little, and God forbid you ask them an actual question. Um, the only problem with asking Chuck DeVore a question is you better have the time to learn something because he understands it. Which, of course, is why you left the state of California for greener pastures or at least windblown prairie in Texas. But today, I want to start off with the discussion. You've made some comments recently. Let's put up that first issue here. What you had, Trump's Golden Dome, which is, I said, everybody knows that Israel has the Iron Dome there. Israel is not very wide and needs this dome because of the constant projectiles aimed at them. The United States has a similar issue. Chuck, recently you spoke or gave a quote about this, if we can put that up. And you talked about affordability and how this may be changing nuclear deterrence or our entire defense posture. I agree with you that this isn't just an issue of China. It's also an issue of the rogue state. And so why don't we start there, Chuck? Why don't you describe what the Golden Dome is designed to do and why you think this requires a rethinking of perhaps our entire way we look at defense?
Right. Well, I mean, let's go back to the beginning. If you go back 42 years ago, I was still in college in 1983 when President Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, which at the time was widely derided by its critics as Star Wars, perhaps not realizing how wildly popular that moniker was among the general public. They're like, well, gee, Star Wars is kind of cool. The challenge back then, of course, though, was that our sensors and our electronics, our ability to aim things and shoot things out of the sky was fairly rudimentary compared to today. In fact, some of the theory was that we had to resort to really pretty ingenious weapon systems. Edward Teller, the father of the H bomb, for example, had this thought of putting X ray lasers in space where you'd have small nuclear devices that would explode and would power these X rays that could shoot down incoming missiles. Of course, only a portion of the Reagan shield was built. A good portion of that, by the way, Tom, you mentioned Israel's Iron Dome. A key component of that, the Arrow anti-ballistic missile system, was actually launched as a direct result of Reagan's SDI, partially due to the Republicans losing the midterms in 1986, which caused the Democrats to shut down most SDI spending. But interestingly enough, there was still a consensus between both parties, at least among enough Democrats to help fund some of Israel's missile defense. And so America was able to continue to advance a lot of the anti-missile defense technology through Israel with their own programs. Now, we've had now 42 years of advancements in electronics and in the ability to put things into orbit. And so what's happened is it's really kind of hard for people today perhaps to realize this. But if you go back 40 years ago, let's say to 1985, the processing capacity of computers has increased, get this, 37 million times over that 40 years. And what's important about that is that when you think about computers and processing, it isn't just the processing. You know, on our devices here, the cameras that are on these devices, they're not like the cameras that had like chemical film, 400 ASA film or anything like that. The cameras in these devices are really just processors. They're different types of processors. And so the ability to take amazing, very detailed views of the Earth or of projectiles that have been launched have also increased by a gigantic amount over these last 40 years. So the processing power having increased by 37 million times is a huge component in being able to have a viable missile defense. Now, here's the other big component. Elon Musk and SpaceX. So over the last 40 years, the cost to orbit, to low Earth orbit, from going from either a Delta II, which I was involved with that program in the civilian aerospace and defense industry when I was in doing that for a living before I was elected, or the space shuttle, you compare that to either a Falcon X or even Starship, which Musk is developing. The cost to orbit is down at least 370 times, 370 fold over what it was 40 years ago. And Musk thinks he can drive that to 1,000 times savings. So, in other words, a cost to orbit of about $10 a kilogram or about $22. Pardon me, what is it? No, $22, I think, a kilogram or $10 a pound, something like that. So that's just an amazing reduction in the cost of getting things into orbit. And why that is important, Tom, is that's how you defend against missiles. You have to have a lot of sensors in space, and you have to have different types of interceptors in space. And I argue, having thought about this, that when you're going to build a nuclear weapon, so you've got a nuclear bomb, you've got the missile that you have to figure out how to get from wherever you are to America. You have to have a guidance system. You have to have a nice nose cone on it or some ability for it to survive reentry and be steered. All of that costs a lot of money. And in the olden days, it would have cost more money to defend against that. And part of Reagan's argument was it's more moral to defend against nuclear weapons than to have them in the first place. Well, now, Tom, I think that the calculus is shifting, and it's very likely that we can defend against nuclear missiles for cheaper than you can make them, which is revolutionary. I called it a revolutionary inflection point.
Yeah. So listening to you, first of all, my device, I love photography. I had a $5,000 camera, single mirror. And then all of a sudden I pick up this new, I think it was a 14 Max, and not long distance, but there's 48 megapixels. It's crazy. So just even for little old me doing this, but you mentioned it. So, and to think about, this is, the iPhone came out in what, 2006 or something, 2007.
About right.
So 18 years. Where, I don't know if you can answer this question or anybody can. Where are we going to be in 18 years? In 30 years?
Right.
Where are we? We don't have a choice, right? We have to do this because China, and especially I want you to focus on the rogue state issue, because I've talked about this forever. It's not necessarily Russia you're defending yourself against. You need the rogue state, which may have 2 or 3 missiles. Go ahead.
Right. So the current system that we have is we have 40 interceptors at Fort Wainwright in Alaska, and I was part of that procurement as well, with Boeing winning the prime contractor role for the ground-based interceptor. We have another 4 interceptors at Vandenberg Air Force Base there on the coast of California. And then, of course, there's the Aegis missile system on board U.S. Navy vessels, some U.S. Navy vessels that can shoot down missiles. And then, lastly, THAAD, the Terminal High Area Defense System. THAAD, I worked on the THAADS program as well for Lockheed. So I'm very familiar with these systems by dint of the fact that that's how I earned my living before I was elected in 2004. Now, the key, though, with a rogue state launch is, first of all, do we have the sensor array currently around the country, both in orbit and on the ground, to be able to, with high confidence, determine where is the launch coming from, and even more importantly, who did it, who launched that missile. And the problem that we have with certain rogue launches is that in many cases, depending on where it's coming from, we would not be able to shoot it down reliably. And at that point, how are we deterring these rogue states or terrorist actors from being able to attack America? We could theoretically lose a few 100,000 people, depending on when and where it hit, how big it was, and have no effective means of retaliation. Wouldn't it be better, though, to have an anti missile system that could not only detect the launch, but with a high degree of confidence be able to defeat that launch and shoot it down? I think that that's far preferable to, for example, launching another war similar to the war in Afghanistan that lasted some 20 years.
So, Chuck, um, the Democrat Party, gone are the days of where there were Scoop Jackson Democrats. They've turned into pacifists in many cases. Their domestic policy. In the 60s, it was guns versus butter. I think that's very true today. You've seen the way they react towards Israel. What I mean, are the parties? I wrote a book, The Divided Era. You know, are the parties going to get together on this, or do you see you mentioned Democrats before? I had forgotten about that they funded the Iron Dome in the past. Do you see them getting together on this?
Yeah, so I would argue that the coalition within the Democratic Party that's in favor of helping Israel defend itself has dwindled significantly over the last 40 years. There's still a few. I would argue that there's probably a few Democrats today who would be really swayed by the logic of this. I don't know, for example, I don't know because I haven't asked them or heard him, but Democrats like Ro Khanna in California, I could see potentially seeing the merit of such a system because, again, it could save a lot of lives, not just American lives, but the lives of those who might be in the crosshairs of our retaliation. Which again is why, from a moral standpoint, it's better to have such a system, especially given the fact that I really believe that the economics of missile defense have shifted decisively in favor of defense because of these massive improvements in processing capability. And Tom, it isn't just the processing capability on the interceptor, on the missile that would be used to shoot down the nuclear missile. It's the processing capability in terms of networking and very rapidly sharing information and determining where the threat is and where it's going. You may understand, or you may know, because you already know about the system, Tom, that with the Iron Dome in Israel, the system does very rapid processing and figures out which projectiles, which mortar bombs, which Katyusha rockets, which ballistic missiles are a threat to populated areas and which are not. And if the software calculates with the sensors that there's no threat, it doesn't waste missiles on trying to shoot those down. Now, it's not 100% perfect, but it's darn perfect, right? It's pretty close. And frankly, I think the economics of it wouldn't really work out very well if it tried to shoot everything down. Plus the fact that you'd probably run out of ammo pretty quickly. So when you look at that sort of processing capability, when you look at the processing capabilities we have, for example, on an Aegis cruiser system, and how we're constantly upgrading those. I'm pretty confident today that we could build the sort of missile defense system, Trump's Golden Dome, that Reagan conceived of and dreamed of some 42 years ago. But from a technological standpoint, we just weren't quite there yet.
Yeah, as a historian, I we, with relative ease, I can say that democracies tend to react. They don't plan a significant amount in advance. Look at the state of our grid across the country, right? If we should be proactive in that. Even the Second Punic War with the Romans never expected the Carthaginians under Hannibal to make it over the mountains, and they didn't protect themselves like that. And he marched virtually on Rome, right? So I'm afraid of this reactive state. We got to put that. The reason why I wanted you on is because you have this extraordinary background to talk about this issue. And it was not really covered last week because it's not not something you can criticize Trump on as easily, and it takes a thought process. I hope people listen to you, and that's one of the reasons why I want to do this
Thank
interview.
you.
The other reason I wanted to do it is because I pulled out of the Wayback Machine. If we can put up the next picture for us for the show. Who's that guy? What's the date of this? March of 2012.
Wow. Yeah.
This is from National Review. I'm kidding, folks, because not only does he have that great background, but he was in the California legislature. He understands that dynamic. He's great on economics. California, this is still an issue, is it not, Chuck?
Well, it's an evergreen issue. Unfortunately, through California's perennially bad leadership, they have high taxes and a heavy regulatory burden and a toxic lawsuit climate. The unions are very powerful in California, and that has resulted in a nonstop domestic net migration out of the state every year, year after year, for well over 20 years. I know that I think it was 3 years in a row, California even lost population. I think they finally stopped the hemorrhaging this last year with international arrivals, barely more than making up for the domestic out migration. But in any given year, on average, California loses a net of between 80 and about 125,000 people through domestic outmigration. And Texas, by comparison, typically picks up a net of about 50 to 100,000 every year, with the majority or plurality of that coming from California, like I did. So that's been a phenomena that really hasn't stopped. It accelerated during the Great Recession. It accelerated again during COVID because California's lockdowns were so much more draconian than those of most of the rest of the nation. And people just couldn't take it anymore, so they moved. And recent recent data would seem to suggest that this continues. In preparation for speaking to you and your listeners, I went and looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for private sector job growth from the eve of COVID in January 2020 to the latest month for which data is available, April 2025. And the private sector job growth in California over that period has been 1.8%. The U.S. minus California and Texas, so we're taking the 48 other states, job growth was about 5%. So compared to the U.S., California is about 64% less than the U.S. average. Texas's growth in the same period was 11.2%,
Wow.
or 124% more than the U.S. average. In other words, double the U.S. average minus California and Texas. So that shows you a huge difference between the two most populous states. By the way, Tom, they're both majority minority and have been for, 15, 20 years. So it's not like they don't both have very heterogeneous populations. A lot of different people in both states.
Yeah, and I think the travesty of that, and I think you'll agree with me, is you can make the argument that California, the land, its location on the globe, should be the richest place on the globe. The amazing shorelines to trade with the Pacific and the world, the minerals, the lumber, everything.
Right.
And Tom McClintock years ago said, I know you know Tom, friends of Tom, just said that only California could convince people to leave for the Nevada desert, right?
Yeah.
Through
I mean,
policy.
it's really remarkable. I mean, you're absolutely right. And when you think about California's assets, it's kind of like a big corporation with a lot of goodwill. And so, if a CEO of a corporation with a lot of goodwill starts to make some strategic mistakes, it may take a while before bankruptcy sets in. In California's case, of course, you've got the natural resources, which include the beauty, a lot of oil and gas, a lot of minerals. The just it's an amazing state. You also have the vaunted UC system and some private universities that are world class in California. You have Silicon Valley, you have Hollywood. You used to have the aerospace and defense industry. That used to
Yeah.
be the center of it in the country was in California, no longer.
Yeah, but
That's why,
I don't think people even realize that. And it was right where you lived, right? In Orange
right.
County.
I used to spend a lot of time both working in the Bay Area and in Orange County and Los Angeles counties because that's where our customers were. Flying back and forth between Orange County and the San Jose airport to work in Sunnyvale, or doing work in Los Angeles with companies like Rocketdyne or Rockwell or Northrop Grumman or Litton. Those companies have all relocated their headquarters and most of their operations out of state now because of the cost of energy, the cost of labor, the cost of land, the regulatory burden, the tax burden. So, they're in it to make money, and they're making that money somewhere else. And so that's why we see this continued drain of people leaving California, being backfilled mostly by international arrivals, a good mixture of both legal and illegal. And that's frankly the only thing that's kept California's population from completely collapsing.
So, Chuck, one of the ways I describe California is it is a social justice state, and the legislature and Newsom think that if they craft the perfect set of laws, they will make life more perfect for people, as if just passing a law creates something. And I think the biggest demonstration of that, or one of them, is minimum wage laws. And we see we can bring up some pics here. California, of course, has raised its minimum wage to 20 plus and $20, and of course they lost 16,000 jobs. A lot of this, of course, is in the fast food industry. And we find out that LA City Council wants to push that to $30 by, I think, 2028. And, Newsom went along with this stuff. They go along with this thinking that, that they're immune from the laws of economics, and they certainly don't believe that. I think in your time in the legislature, you must have seen some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They think that just by passing an edict that they can wave their hands and create a new reality. I've written quite a bit on this over the years, not as much recently, but when that first $20 an hour law went through, I critiqued it on a couple of different points. First of all, I pointed out that this would cause an acceleration of investment in robotics and automation, that to the degree that labor became more expensive than capital, you were going to see fast food places or other sorts of jobs that could be readily automated to be automated. And that I think I called it like the Automation Acceleration Act because that's what it would do. The other thing I criticize is that California is a vast and varied state, and the cost of living in the Bay Area or
Yes.
Los Angeles is a heck of a lot different than it is in Modesto or Fresno or Bakersfield or in far north Butte County. In fact, the multiples are greater than two, in some cases three. In other words, you may be paying
Yes.
3 or 4 times for rent in San Francisco or Los Angeles than what you would pay in Butte County. And so, unfortunately, though, that minimum wage law conceived of a flat rate across the entire state. Now, when New York passed very similar legislation at the same time, I mean, I hate to give kudos to New York, and I still disagree with the law in principle. But what they did is they actually made the law applicable to the cost of living in each one of New York's counties, where
Yeah.
up in upstate New York, the minimum wage was a lot less than it was in New York City. So if you're going to do damage to the economy, at least for heaven's sakes, understand that things aren't the same everywhere. So, for example, that $20 an hour in California, you would have to get paid roughly $12 an hour in Texas to be able to have the same standard of living as getting paid $20 an hour in California. The $30 an hour in Los Angeles that was just agreed to by the city council in time,
12 to 3.
yeah, in time for the Olympics in 2028, right?
Wow.
That's
Wow.
$30. On a national average, you'd have to get paid about $17.40 an hour to roughly equal the buying power of $30 an hour in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and the problem, of course, is once you pass that, this minimum wage and labor costs go up, that doesn't occur in a vacuum. And then you have it spreads out. I remember, Chuck, I traveled the state relentlessly. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. I was driving to do an event in the Central Valley, and I stopped off at my favorite Carl's Jr.'s to get, and it was like, this is like 5 years ago. And I got a simple hamburger there, you know, and it was, I remember it was almost $15. And I thought, and I thought to myself, how can the people working here afford? I
Right.
mean, I remember as a kid, my parents would take us to McDonald's. Of course, this was long ago and far away, and it was you get a change for your dollar, and that's what they could afford. That was a big deal for us kids, not for them to go out to this. But a family of four, $60 for a
Right.
hamburger? And they don't seem, we're going to run out of time here, but they don't seem to get that. But again, Gavin Newsom's going to stand up when he runs for president. I'm sure you agree with me and say, I did this for workers. I created this minimum wage. No, really, what you did is laid off a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and yes, the person who kept the job temporarily benefited, but they didn't. And in this next segment, I'm going to talk about the fact that Kathy Hochul and Elise Stefanik are statistically tied in a poll for the next governor of New York. And in the 2 minutes we have left, if you can just come, I, I, and I say this all the time, the Democrats are no longer about delivering results like the Labor Party of the 70s. They've just become ideological. And that's why Kathy Hochul's in trouble. That's why Gavin Newsom's underwater, because at some point people want to be safe and affordable and have education. It's not happening in these blue states. And that's why these apple carts are getting somewhat upset. Your thoughts as we close
Well,
out
yeah, I
here?
mean, the Democratic Party just in a very short period of time, and I think Trump was the accelerant that pushed this along, have become the party of the elite white college educated American.
Wait a minute, I want to stop you there. You said Trump was the accelerant.
Yeah.
There's accelerants in fires. So you're saying the Democrat Party is burning itself down?
Yeah, yeah, I am. And here's the challenge, right? Those are the individuals who are least impacted by any of these
Yeah.
issues. When the economy has pneumonia, they're like, "Oh, is there a slight draft? What's going on here?" And so they're fine. But here's what's interesting about Trump and what he's done. The Republican Party under Trump has gone back to being the party of American free labor as it was at its start back with
I love
Lincoln
that.
and
Thank
John
you.
C. Fremont, right? That's what's happened. It's amazing, isn't it?
Most Americans have no idea that the Republicans pre-Civil War believed in free labor, which meant not that you worked for free like slavery, but that you believed that the individual had the right to be a free man and work where he wanted. That's awesome. That's a great thing to finish up. Folks, Chuck, well, folks, you need to follow Chuck. Because what I love about this man is his varied background. And you can see how articulate. Didn't say once. Like you watch people on TV, don't have half your brain and can't articulate. Tell them where they can follow you or what's best.
Well, I'm on X at Chuck Devore. That's where I stay the most active. And then my most recent book, The Crisis of the House Never United. If you're interested about the early days of the Republic and how our Constitution almost wasn't ratified and what
Right?
might have happened, that's what that book is about. It's a historical fiction, and I think a lot of your viewers would enjoy that.
I talked about that. Many of the votes that they took were one vote
Right,
difference. And
right.
barely got. So I'm gonna send you my book. My lessons book. Yours. I'll want to read that for sure. You're a great storyteller, folks. We run out of time. I could talk to Chuck like in the old days for endlessly. Thanks so much for coming on, and please come back again so we can update all of this. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening in. I know you enjoyed Chef Devore. We'll be right back with our third segment of Politics in Perspective. Welcome back to Politics in Perspective. I hope you enjoyed that segment. California v. Texas. That's always an interesting discussion. Well, it's kind of lopsided, isn't it? And when will Californians ever learn? I don't know. We'll see what this upcoming election looks like, whether Kamala Harris actually jumps in or Steve Hilton or Chad Bianco, both of whom, well, we interviewed Chad Bianco. Upcoming is Steve Hilton. We'll see what they have to say about all of this. But let's stick with politics and Democrat Northeast politics. Is it changing? Are the Democrats in trouble even in the Northeast? Of course, keep in mind the Northeast has been for a long time, decades upon decades, the stronghold for Democrats. New York was always a given, Connecticut's a given, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, certainly. I don't know if I mentioned New Jersey. So those are all givens. But are they still? And my supposition is, which will be the subject of an upcoming op-ed of mine, is the Democrats are turning into the Labor Party of the 70s. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Labor Party of the 70s in England was more about ideology than actually delivering on basic necessities and standard of living and the safety in the streets and the like. They weren't delivering on the basics. And they're not doing that among the Democrat Party. Certainly, they're not doing that in California. California is, I think, the 8th least safest state, dead last in opportunity. We talked about this. So dead last in affordability. You know what similar places are? Well, New York City, the state of New York. And so, if we remember, Lee Zeldin, who's now the EPA director, ran for the governor of New York and shocked people how close he came. Well, let's talk shock. Let's look at this poll that just came out. And this is a poll showing that Governor Hochul, the Democrat, of course, who would seek re-election, has a 1-point lead over Elise Stefanik. So let's talk about this poll. It is last week. Stefanik hasn't even said for sure that she's running. Of course, Elise is a national figure, very articulate woman. I think has a strong backbone. She, of course, is the one who took on the Ivy League school presidents who couldn't say out loud, the danger that they were presenting to students at their universities with respect to the protesters and how the Jewish students felt, right? So that's Elise Stefanik. What's very interesting about that, of course, is that, among other things, the fact that it's close, 43-42 is pretty shocking, or 42-41. But Elise Stefanik's from upstate New York. So yes, it's more red up there, but the population is very limited. New York, of course, has New York City. And there you have it. You have all of these New Yorkers who are what? Frustrated, to say the least, because their streets aren't safe. The cost of living is high. Of course, Hochul famously put in the congestion tax a year ago. She said, well, there's an affordability issue. And then as soon as the election was over in the fall, she reinstituted it. But she's not delivering. And then if we take our next little segment here from New Jersey, what did we find? This is from January of this year. And in January, it said New Jersey had 9 more Democrats than it did 4 years before. That's not a typo. When I remember looking back at this and thinking, 9? They just have 9. Republicans have 184,000 plus more than they did in 2021. If you recall, for a moment there were these thoughts in the last election cycle that somehow, some way perhaps, that New Jersey was going to be in play in the 2024 election. Well, it wasn't, but it was a lot closer than they imagined. And this voter registration thing is a dynamic that's been going on. New Jersey's the same way as California in many ways, which is an affordability crisis, highest taxes, among the highest taxes in the nation, just like New York has. Certainly New York City has arguably the highest in the nation because the New York City tax, in addition to the state tax, on and on and on. But there you have New Jersey, which is also not delivering basic things to its people. And so you have this movement. As many as you know, I spend a lot of time in New Jersey. And I will say this, the freeways are better and the roads are better than in California. But nevertheless, there's this affordability issue. And so look at how close we have seen what's going on here, how close it's getting. And for those of you really watching New Jersey, you're familiar with the fact that Scott Pressler is in the state. Who's Scott Pressler? He's the guy who helped turn Pennsylvania with such a huge voter registration effort. So there you go. You have New Jersey getting close too, and the blue far left Democrats aren't changing their ways. They're not changing their policies. Look at Maine. Maine now is partially in the national eye because of the whole issue of biological men in women's sports. And what are we finding? We're finding that, of course, the governor, who famously was in the Oval Office where Trump called her out on this particular issue, and she's not changing her view. There is, within Maine, this is a big issue. Who's going to come out on top? Well, the Republicans, no matter what, even if the state doesn't change the policy, the reality is voters are not, the same amount of voters aren't happy with Democrats in that state as they have been over the years. So if you look at the whole Northeast, something's afoot. If you can get Elise Stefanik within 1 point in a gubernatorial poll in New York, and if you can get Republicans out registering Democrats by a massive amount in New Jersey, then you know this whole thing about Democrats not delivering and still being ideological is a real thing. We're going to have to watch where that goes and see. I'm sure that poll is going to encourage Elise Stefanik to come out. But let's talk more broadly about the Democrat Party. We saw something horrific this past week in Washington, D.C. We saw the shooting of a young couple, a Jewish couple. Why were they shot? You know, as of this recording, they still didn't say, weren't certain about the motive. Of course, the guy who shot them, alleged, the networks have to say alleged, I don't. Everybody saw him. He admitted to it for numerous people. He's on camera doing this awful deed. He said he did it with respect to his support for Hamas and his hate for Israel. And so he shoots two young Israelis who have nothing to do with the Israeli government decisions. But the far left seems to think that okay. Now, of course, no one should be shocked that it has come to this. When you call for the elimination of Israel, when you express this much hate among Jews or for Jews, who can be shocked that someone takes it too far? I'm not the first to say this, but I'm saying it again. Who can be shocked that violence has increased? Keep in mind, the Black Lives Matter protests were exceptionally violent. There was a full-on insurrection in Portland on a federal court building where they were trying to burn it to the ground with no repercussions. Where I live in California, you saw on Twitter calls to burn down the business community, Walnut Creek, California, on Twitter with no repercussions. They had to board up the city, and a woman was shot in the melee that occurred there. We saw that across the board, across the country, I'm sorry, whether it's in St. Louis during the Obama years or in Minnesota, with no repercussions for the groups that push this kind of incendiary language. And now it is morphed over from Black Lives Matter into this massive protests against Israel and against Jewish students. I continue to maintain there is, for all these groups that are doing this, there is not probably a single one of these people who can claim in their lives that a Jewish person did anything at any time negative to them. Certainly not based on religion. It might have been that they, cut them off driving. But no, this is a greater aspect of the left, which is turned into the party of protest and is tolerating this. And then they call for the elimination of the Jewish state, and who can be shocked when it takes this very next step? The real question is, when does all of this end? And it's only going to end when the people pushing it have to pay a price. That's these universities, that's the Democrat Party, who tolerates within their own ranks the likes of people like Omar, who talks about this kind of stuff and won't condemn it before it occurs. Until the Democrats pay this price, this is going to continue. Now, the Democrats are paying a price, and they are being held captive. The view of people is that they are the party of protests. Well, what happened in the 60s when they became the party of protests? They lost elections. What happened last fall? They lost elections. But that still doesn't make up for the lost life of these two innocent people who don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of politics, let alone what's going on in campuses. So I ask you to keep this in mind when you think about voting in the future. Who is saying to them it's okay to protest like this, even though they know it's going over the line? Because tolerance, as I put up with this last quote, and we'll finish the show on that, unlimited tolerance is not okay. It doesn't work. It doesn't lead to actual tolerance. So a friend of mine always says that you get what you tolerate. Well, unlimited tolerance by the left of what's going on in campuses doesn't actually lead to tolerance between people. It does lead to more violence. And that's my message at the end of this show of Politics in Perspective. As always, thank you to Patriot.tv and AUN TV. Please share this. You can see us on YouTube, on Rumble, and you can, of course, get the links at politicalvanguard.com. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.